Blow out your candles, then sign the papers. My daughter smirked at my 81st birthday. My son-in-law whispered, "The $80 million empire is ours now." But when the lights dimmed and the lawyer rolled in a projector, their laughter choked in their throats. My name is Sylvia Whitmore, and before I dive into this story, let me pause for a moment. If you're watching this, I want to know, where are you watching from? Are you listening in the quiet of your home, maybe on your porch with the evening breeze? Or are you tucked away in a bedroom, escaping the noise of family that doesn't always understand you? Wherever you are, I want you to know you're not alone. Stories like mine happen more often than people admit. I was born in a small town where nothing came easy. My father worked in a steel mill. My mother took in sewing to keep the family afloat. We weren't wealthy, but we had pride. That's where I learned the two lessons that carried me through life. Hard work pays off, and dignity is worth more than gold. When I married my late husband, Robert, we had dreams bigger than our pockets. He was the visionary. I was the steady hand. We scraped by, opening a little bakery that, over the years, became a cornerstone of our community. From there, one investment led to another: properties, stocks, businesses. We didn't inherit money. We built it brick by brick, loaf by loaf. By the time Robert passed, I was left holding not just memories, but an empire worth nearly $80 million. People assume that when you have that kind of wealth, life gets easier. But the truth is, wealth paints a target on your back, even when that target is drawn by your own family. I never thought my daughter, Vanessa, or her husband, Mark, would be the ones to sharpen the knives. I never thought I'd hear the words that came out of their mouths on my birthday. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the days leading up to that night. My granddaughter, Emma, sweet, steady Emma, had been the only one to check on me without asking for something in return. While Vanessa and Mark paraded me around as their family trophy, Emma sat with me on quiet afternoons, bringing me tea, listening to my stories. She had her grandfather's heart. I suppose that's why I trusted her when she warned me. She leaned close one afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper. "Grandma, they're planning something. Mom and Dad keep talking about paperwork. They said you'll be too tired to argue on your birthday." At first, I laughed it off. The idea that my own daughter would trap me on my 80th birthday with legal documents sounded absurd. But then the memories surfaced. Vanessa sliding papers across my kitchen counter, insisting they were just routine. Mark calling late at night about protecting the estate. The new lawyer they introduced me to, one who avoided my eyes. The puzzle pieces began to fit, and they painted a picture I didn't want to see. I had two choices: play the fool and let them strip me of everything I built, or prepare a move they'd never forget. And so, as the invitations for my birthday went out and the cake was ordered, I called someone else, a man I trusted more than anyone outside my family. His name was Mr. Whitaker Old, reliable, sharp as ever. He had handled Robert's and my legal affairs for decades. When I told him what Emma overheard, his silence lasted only a beat before he said, "Then let's make your birthday unforgettable." And so, while Vanessa and Mark thought they were orchestrating their victory, I was quietly staging my defense. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about dignity, legacy, and proving, if only to myself, that at 80 years old, I was still a fighter. The night of my birthday arrived sooner than I expected. As I dressed in a silver-gray silk suit with brooch, pinning my mother's brooch to my shoulder, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My face was lined, yes, but my eyes still burned with the same fire I had when I opened my first bakery. They think you're weak, I told myself. Show them who you are. By the time I arrived at my mansion's grand dining room, the stage was set. Family gathered, laughter filled the air, glasses clinked. But beneath it all, I could feel it, the tension, the waiting, the plotting. I sat at the head of the table, candles flickering on a cake far too extravagant for my taste. And then Vanessa carried it toward me, her smile wide but her eyes sharp. She leaned down and said the words that chilled me to my bones. Blow out your candles, then sign the papers. Vanessa's voice lingered in my ears long after she set the cake down in front of me. Blow out your candles, then sign the papers. It was dressed up as a joke, the kind of playful banter a daughter might make to her elderly mother. The room chuckled, but I knew the difference between humor and intent. Her eyes didn't sparkle with love. They glinted with calculation. I forced a smile, lifting the knife to cut the cake, but inside, my chest tightened. I thought back to the little girl she used to be, the one who clung to my apron strings when thunderstorms rattled the house, the one whose hair I braided every school morning. I had given her everything, the best schools, her first car, the down payment on her house, and here she stood at my birthday table, circling me like a vulture. Mark, my son-in-law, slid up beside her, his hand resting casually on her shoulder. His voice dropped low, just enough for me to catch. The $80 million empire is ours now. The room erupted in happy birthday, voices off key and smiling, but for me, the words drowned under his whisper. I looked around the table, at the faces of cousins, nephews, distant relatives, and realized something chilling. Not one of them knew what was happening. They thought this was a celebration. They didn't see the wolves in silk. I cleared my throat. Thank you, everyone. What a blessing to reach 80 with family around me. My words were steady, but my hands trembled just enough that I clenched them in my lap. Vanessa leaned toward me. Don't worry, Mom. It's just a formality. She nodded toward the neat stack of papers on the sideboard, positioned like an after-dinner mint. We'll explain after you blow the candles. Formality. That word had become her favorite lately. A formality, when she asked me to sign a power of attorney. A formality, when she pushed me to transfer certain accounts into her name. She thought dressing betrayal in polite words would soften its edge, but to me, it only made the knife sharper. I glanced across the table at Emma. My granddaughter's hands twisted nervously in her lap. Our eyes met, and for a split second her gaze flickered to the stack of papers. Then back to me. It was the smallest signal, but it gave me strength. She hadn't been wrong. Vanessa never had patience for subtlety. She grew up in a house where money was the air she breathed, and she learned early how to manipulate with a smile. But Mark, he was worse. Suave, charming, with that permanent air of entitlement. He married Vanessa for 2 reasons: my daughter's beauty and my family's fortune. Over the years, he positioned himself closer and closer to my business affairs, offering to help with documents, volunteering to manage investments. I humored him at first, but I always kept my distance. Robert used to say, "Mark's got a wolf's grin, Sylvia." Watch him, I should have listened more closely. The air in the dining room grew heavier as I sat in silence. Vanessa didn't like silence. It left too much room for truth to slip in. "Mom," she prodded, "don't look so serious. This is your day. We just want what's best for you. We're family, after all, family." The word stung. Family wasn't supposed to look at you and see dollar signs. Family wasn't supposed to measure your worth by what you could hand over. But as I looked at Vanessa and Mark, I realized They had stopped seeing me as a mother years ago. To them, I was an empire to inherit, a wallet to empty, a throne to usurp. My mind wandered back to Emma. She had been different. While her parents schemed, she sat at my side with quiet loyalty. She noticed the way they hovered over my mail, the way they grew impatient when I questioned them about routine documents. She was the one who leaned across the garden table one afternoon and whispered, "Grandma, don't sign anything." Her words had been my warning bell. Now, in this room filled with chatter and clinking glasses, I sat in the eye of the storm. I could have exploded then, could have shouted the truth for all to hear. But I had learned something in my 80 years. Timing is everything. And my timing was not tonight's cake cutting. It was still to come. Instead, I smiled sweetly at Vanessa, hiding the steel behind my teeth. "Of course, darling," I said, brushing my hand over hers as if reassured. "We'll talk about the papers after the cake." Her face lit up with smug satisfaction. Mark leaned back, his smirk widening. They thought they had already won. As the guests sang and the candles flickered, I bent closer to the flames. 80 little lights shimmered on the cake, each one marking a year I had fought, loved, and survived. I inhaled deeply, not just to blow them out, but to remind myself of every breath I had earned on my own. And in that moment, as the room clapped and cheered, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This birthday would not end the way they planned. The cake was cut, the candles extinguished, and the applause rang hollow in my ears. For everyone else, it was just another family gathering, a milestone for an old woman they thought had already lived her best years. But for me, every smile, every toast, every glance across that long mahogany table carried a double meaning. I watched Vanessa bustle around the dining room like the hostess of the century, her laughter high and practiced. She refilled champagne flutes, clinked glasses, and leaned into conversations as though she were queen of the night. But her eyes kept darting back to the sideboard, the one where those papers lay in their crisp folder, waiting for my shaky signature. Mark, meanwhile, stationed himself near me, a shadow glued to my shoulder. He kept a glass of wine perpetually full, nudging it closer each time I took a sip, as if eager to dull my senses. His voice purred into my ear at every chance. "You've earned your rest, Sylvia. This is just to make things easier for you." Easier for me, or easier for him? The room itself felt different that night. Normally, my birthday gatherings were warm affairs, messy, loud, filled with off-key singing and children underfoot. But this time, everything was polished, curated. The cake was 3 tiers high, decorated with golden icing I never would have chosen. The music wasn't cheerful jazz, but a low instrumental hum, more suited for a corporate gala than a family party. Even the seating arrangement was deliberate. Me at the head, Vanessa and Mark flanking my sides, and the rest scattered like an audience. I caught Emma's gaze again. She sat 3 chairs down, quiet, her fork idly moving crumbs on her plate. Her eyes flicked between me and the papers, then to her mother. She looked as though she wanted to leap across the table and snatch the folder away. But her youth made her powerless in this room of older voices, and she knew it. All she could offer me was the strength in her gaze, and I accepted it like a lifeline. "Mom," Vanessa's voice rang out suddenly, cutting through the chatter. "You've worked so hard all your life. Tonight we just want you to relax. Let us take care of everything from now on," Table murmured approvingly. To anyone else, it sounded like a daughter's devotion. But I heard the sharpness underneath, the command disguised as care. I set my fork down and dabbed at my lips with the napkin. "Is that so?" I said lightly. Mark chuckled, leaning closer. She's right. You've carried this empire long enough. The next generation needs to step in. His hand slid toward the folder on the sideboard, fingers tapping it like a predator circling prey. The word empire made my blood boil. My fortune wasn't an empire. It was the sum of my life. Every dollar earned, every property built, every investment chosen. It was my sweat, my late nights, my sacrifices. And now, reduced to a conquest for greedy heirs. But I smiled anyway. "How thoughtful of you both," I murmured. I caught the flicker of triumph in Vanessa's eyes. She thought she had me exactly where she wanted me. It was then that a peculiar thing happened. The chandelier above flickered once, just enough to cast shadows across the table. A hush fell over the room for half a second, as though even the electricity held its breath. Then the light steadied, and the conversations picked back up, though slower this time, more uncertain. The night wore on, and the moment everyone had been tiptoeing around finally arrived. Vanessa rose, champagne glass in hand, tapping it with her fork. "Before we close the evening," she announced, her voice syrupy sweet, "there's one small matter of business." Emma stiffened. My heart thudded. Mark retrieved the folder with a flourish, laying it in front of me as though presenting a crown. "It's just a signature, Sylvia." To ensure everything runs smoothly, all eyes turned to me. The laughter dimmed, the fork stopped scraping, the children hushed. I could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on my shoulders, as though my entire life had been leading to this moment. I opened the folder, flipping through the pages slowly. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the fury bubbling inside me. The legal jargon confirmed my worst suspicions: transfers of ownership, revised wills, clauses that would strip me of every decision-making right I had. Vanessa leaned in, whispering, "Don't overthink it, Mom. You'll still have your comforts. This just secures things. For us, for us." I closed the folder softly, my lips curling into the faintest smile. "I see." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. My pulse hammered, but my voice was calm, measured. "Perhaps I should say a few words before I sign." Vanessa laughed nervously. "Of course, after. But first—" "No," I interrupted, my voice slicing through the room. "Now." The chandelier flickered again. The room dimmed. And then, just as Vanessa reached for the folder to push it back toward me, a low, mechanical hum filled the air. Heads turned as the side door creaked open. Mr. Whitaker, my lawyer, entered, his silver hair gleaming under the shifting light. Behind him, an assistant wheeled in a projector and screen. The machine clicked as it powered on, casting a sharp beam across the wall. Gasps rippled through the room. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded neatly in my lap, and allowed myself the smallest, most dangerous smile. The game had just shifted. The projector's hum filled the silence like a drumbeat. Faces turned toward the blank screen, confusion etched across every brow. Vanessa's smile faltered for the first time that evening, her glass of champagne trembling just enough to make the bubbles shiver. Mark's jaw clenched, his hand tightening on the folder as though it might shield him from what was about to come. Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat, a sound I'd heard in courtrooms and boardrooms alike. Calm, firm, commanding. "Good evening, everyone. I apologize for the interruption, but Mrs. Whitmore has asked me to make a short presentation before any documents are signed tonight." Murmurs spread through the guests like wildfire. A projector? A lawyer? At a birthday party? It was absurd on the surface, but the sharpness in Whitaker's tone silenced them quickly. Vanessa forced a laugh. "Mom, really? This is hardly the time." "Sit down, Vanessa," I said evenly. my voice steady as stone. If you're so confident in your intentions, you won't mind a little transparency. For a fleeting second, I saw my daughter's face contort, the mask of elegance slipping to reveal the child underneath, caught with her hand in the cookie jar. But Mark nudged her arm, his smirk stretching thin. He leaned toward me. "Sylvia, I don't think you want to make a spectacle out of this." I turned my head slowly, meeting his gaze with a look I'd perfected over decades of negotiations. "Mark, the spectacle was never mine to make. You wrote this performance yourself." Whitaker's assistant dimmed the chandelier until the room glowed only with the projector's light. A slide appeared, an email header, clear as day. From Mark Hastings to Vanessa Hastings. Subject, the birthday plan. A collective gasp swept the room. Vanessa's face drained of color. That's not real," she stammered. Whitaker adjusted his glasses, voice unyielding. "It is very real. Acquired through proper channels, subpoena ready if necessary. Shall I read it, or would you prefer, Vanessa?" Her lips pressed together in a thin line, silent. Whitaker read aloud. "We'll have her sign at the party. With enough champagne, she won't resist. Frame it as her idea, her gift to us. Once she signs, the assets are untouchable. The empire is ours, as Anging Dax Gan, this time sharper, more horrified." Cousins shifted in their seats. Nephews exchanged glances. Whispers crackled. I sat still, my hands folded neatly in my lap, watching the words stab into the room like knives. Vanessa half rose from her chair. "Mom, you don't believe this nonsense. Sit." Down my voice cracked like a whip. At 80 years old, it carried the authority of a lifetime. She froze, then slowly lowered herself, cheeks burning red. The next slide clicked onto the wall. Bank statements. Wire transfers between accounts I'd never authorized. Payments to shell companies tied directly to Mark. Whitaker narrated calmly, like a teacher scolding unruly students. "Here we have evidence of attempted misappropriation of Mrs. Whitmore's funds. Nearly $500,000 siphoned into personal accounts under the guise of consulting fees." Mark shot to his feet, fists clenched. "This is outrageous. You can't just—" "I can," Whitaker interrupted coolly. "And I will. Because every transfer has already been reported to the authorities. You'll find that the banks were far more cooperative than you imagined." The room erupted, family members whispering, some shaking their heads in disgust, others staring at me in awe. I lifted my glass and sipped calmly, the picture of composure. "You see, Mark, I didn't spend my life building this fortune just to hand it to a man who married into it. I've seen sharks before, and you, dear boy, are the smallest of them all." Emma's hand pressed against her mouth, eyes wide, not in fear but in admiration. She had known something was coming, but not this. Whitaker clicked again. A recorded audio file played. Mark's voice filled the room, sharp and smug. "She's old. She'll sign anything if we push hard enough. Once the ink is dry, she's powerless." Every ounce of restraint in me wanted to slam the table, to shout, to let the fury in my chest spill into the air. But I held steady. That was the trick with betrayal. You don't fight it with noise. You fight it with silence, sharpened into a blade. Mark sputtered, pointing toward the screen. "That recording is doctored." Whitaker tilted his head. "Interesting defense. Would you like us to play the second half, where you mention the date, the time, and this very party?" Mark's mouth snapped shut. His face glistened with sweat. I turned to the room, my voice carrying across every corner. "They thought tonight would be my surrender. They wanted to celebrate my 80 years by stripping me of everything I built. But the truth has a way of finding light, even in the darkest corners of greed." The projector screen lingered on the damning email, the words glowing like fire. Vanessa hid her face in her hands. Mark paced like a caged animal, his smirk gone, his mask shattered. The relatives stared at them not as heirs to an empire, but as thieves caught in the act. And I, an 80-year-old woman they believed weak, sat at the head of the table with the quiet power of someone who had just turned the trap back on its makers. I lifted my glass again, savoring the taste of victory as much as the wine. "To family," I said softly, the irony cutting, sharper than any knife. The guests raised their glasses hesitantly, some in shame, some in solidarity. But I wasn't finished. No, the night was only just beginning. The screen glowed with evidence, the whispers in the room thick as smoke. But as I sat there, calm in my chair, my fingers laced together, I felt my mind drift backward. Not because I wanted to escape, but because in moments of betrayal, you remember the foundation. You remember what you sacrificed to build the very thing they're trying to steal. I was not born into wealth. Far from it. I came from a house where shoes were patched, dinners were stretched thin, and winters meant learning how to live with cold drafts through the walls. My father worked 12-hour shifts at the steel mill until his lungs burned black with dust. My mother kept food on the table by sewing dresses for neighbors. They taught me something Vanessa and Mark never understood, that wealth isn't money. It's perseverance, sweat, sacrifice. When I married Robert, we didn't have a dime between us. We rented a one-room flat above a butcher shop. The walls were thin, the pipes rattled, but in that cramped space, we dreamed of a life bigger than the one we were given. Robert was a dreamer, always sketching ideas on napkins, new storefronts, rental properties, expansion plans. I was the realist, the one who took those sketches and figured out how to turn them into bread on the table. Our first step was a bakery, a tiny one, barely larger than a garage, with ovens that groaned louder than the customers who came in. I baked before sunrise, kneading dough until my arms ached. Robert worked the front, charming the locals. We made enough to scrape by, and slowly, the lines at the door grew longer. It was in that bakery that I learned my greatest lesson. Consistency builds empires. Every day we opened at the same hour, served the same quality, greeted each customer like family. By the time I turned 40, we had 3 bakeries across town. The money wasn't much, but the reputation, that was worth something. Then Robert had the idea to invest in property. At first I was terrified. "What do we know about real estate?" I asked him. He smiled and said, "What do we know about baking? We figured that out, didn't we?" So we scraped together enough to buy a rundown apartment building. We fixed it, painted it, cleaned it, and before long tenants lined up. That one building turned into 2, then 5, then 10. By the time Robert passed, decades later, I was left not just with memories of him, but with something he would have been proud of, an estate worth nearly $80 million. Stocks, properties, businesses, all built without cutting corners, without shortcuts, built with honesty and grit. I remember standing in front of our first building after he died, the keys heavy in my hand. Emma was only a child then, clutching my skirt, asking, "Grandma, are we going to lose it all now?" Knelt down and told her, "No, darling. Not as long as I'm alive," that promise carried me. I refused to let grief undo the decades of sweat. Instead, I worked harder. I sat in boardrooms filled with men who looked down on me because of my age, my gender, my wrinkles. I stared them down, signed my contracts, and walked out owning half the room. And for what? To be told by my own daughter that I was too old to manage it now? to have my son-in-law whisper that my life's work was theirs to inherit, as though I were nothing more than a stepping stone. The pain wasn't in their greed, it was in their blindness. They didn't see the woman who clawed her way from flour-dusted aprons to corporate boardrooms. They didn't see the nights I fell asleep over ledgers, the mornings I rose before dawn to check tenants, the sacrifices I made so Vanessa could live in comfort. They saw only an old woman with trembling hands and fading years, but they underestimated me. And worse, they underestimated Emma. That girl, with her quiet eyes and steady heart, had inherited more of my spirit than Vanessa ever had. She didn't care for the empire. She cared for me. She was the one who noticed the strange bank withdrawals, who overheard her parents whispering late at night. She was the one who whispered into my ear, "Grandma, don't trust them." And so, while Vanessa and Mark sharpened their knives, I sharpened mine in silence. I had Whitaker dig, and he dug well. What he uncovered wasn't just greed, it was attempted theft, fraudulent transfers, shady deals, plans to force me into signing away my rights. The irony wasn't lost on me. The girl they thought naive, the granddaughter too young to matter, was the one who saved me. Emma had become my eyes when I doubted myself. The empire I built was worth $80 million on paper. But in that moment, as the projector hummed and the evidence lit the walls, I realized its true value. Not the money, not the buildings, not the stocks. Its true worth was proving that a life lived with integrity cannot be stolen by deceit. I straightened in my chair, the weight of my years pressing into my bones, but the fire in my chest burning brighter than ever. I wasn't about to let them rewrite my story. I hadn't built an empire to have it snatched with a pen at my own birthday table. No, the empire wasn't just mine, it was me. And they were about to learn what happens when you try to rob a woman who has spent her entire life learning how to fight. As Whitaker's slides cycled through the damning evidence, I found myself thinking of all the tiny warning signs that had led to this night. They weren't grand gestures of betrayal. No, betrayal rarely is. It comes in whispers, in small favors, in the way a loved one's eyes linger just a moment too long on something that isn't theirs. Looking back, I realized the writing had been on the wall for years. I just hadn't wanted to read it. The first time Vanessa handed me papers to sign, she had brushed it off with a laugh. "Oh, Mom, it's just a little formality," she'd said, her red nails tapping the dotted line. It was for some joint account she claimed would make it easier to pay my bills. I didn't sign that day. I told her I'd think on it, and her smile cracked for just a second. I told myself I imagined it, but the truth was there. Frustration, impatience, greed. Then came the phone calls. Mark, always the charmer, began calling at odd hours. "Just checking in on you, Sylvia," he'd say smoothly, before pivoting. "You know, the market's unpredictable right now. Maybe it's time to put the estate in younger hands. We'd hate for you to make a mistake this late in life." He never said it outright, but the implication was always clear. "You're too old. Let us handle it." Even Emma had noticed. One afternoon in the garden, she asked, "Grandma, why does Dad keep bringing you envelopes to sign? Don't you already have lawyers for that?" Out of the mouths of children, the truth rings the loudest. But perhaps the biggest sign of all came 6 months earlier, when my longtime lawyer, Mr. Bradley, suddenly retired. Or so I thought. He had handled my affairs faithfully for decades. But one day Vanessa arrived, smiling brightly, saying, "Oh, Mom, Bradley's stepped down. But don't worry, we found you someone new, a friend of Mark's. Very trustworthy. Another word that had grown hollow in their mouths. I met this new lawyer once. He avoided my eyes, pushed papers toward me without explanation, and smiled too quickly whenever Mark spoke. Something in my gut warned me, and I never saw him again. That's when I called Whitaker, quietly bringing him back into the fold without telling anyone. And then there were the gifts. Vanessa began showering me with sudden attention. Flowers delivered to my door, invitations to luncheons, expensive scarves I neither needed nor wanted. I wasn't blind to the timing. Every gift came before another request for paperwork. It wasn't love, it was bait. Even the party tonight had been a sign. Vanessa had insisted on planning it all herself. She waved off Emma's suggestions, controlled every detail, down to the music and menu. At first, I thought it was her way of making me feel special. But as I sat at that gleaming table, surrounded by decorations that didn't reflect me at all, I understood this wasn't my celebration. It was their stage. The saddest sign of all, though, came in the words Vanessa spoke when she thought I wasn't listening. A few weeks ago, I walked past her and Mark as they whispered in the sunroom. Vanessa's voice was sharp, exasperated. She doesn't know what's best for her anymore. If she won't hand it over willingly, we'll have to make her. I stopped just beyond the doorframe, my hand pressed against the wall. The daughter I raised, the girl, had once carried on my hip, sung lullabies to, was talking about me as if I were a burden to be managed, an obstacle to be removed. My heart broke in a way no business betrayal ever had, but I did what I've always done. I tucked that pain away and let it harden into resolve. So tonight, as Whitaker displayed those emails and accounts, I felt no surprise. The shock had already been lived in those small moments, long before the projector lit up the truth. Tonight was only the unveiling. I let my eyes drift around the room. Cousins avoided my gaze, some ashamed, others stunned. A nephew mouthed to his wife, "Unbelievable." My sister's grandchildren sat wide-eyed, their innocence shattered by the sight of their elders exposed. And in that sea of faces, Emma sat tall, her chin lifted, her young eyes burning with vindication. I thought to myself, they thought age made me blind, but age sharpens more than it dulls. Age teaches you to watch, to wait, to recognize the signs that others dismiss. I looked back at Vanessa and Mark. They sat stiff, pale, but still trying to keep their masks in place. They didn't realize yet that their game was already lost. The law was no longer theirs to twist, the family no longer theirs to charm, the empire no longer theirs to steal, and I was no longer their frail mother or pliable mother-in-law. I was Sylvia Whitmore, and I had come prepared. The hum of the projector hung in the air, its beam casting a white square against the far wall. The dining room, moments ago filled with laughter and chatter, now sat cloaked in an uneasy silence. The chandelier flickered once, then dimmed until the only light came from the machine. Shadows stretched across the long mahogany table, crawling over the faces of my family. It was as though the house itself leaned in to watch. I could feel every eye on me, waiting. Vanessa's hand twitched toward the folder, eager to redirect the attention back to her little scheme. "Mom," she said too brightly, her voice cracking just slightly, "this is ridiculous. Let's not make a scene. Just what?" I interrupted, my voice level but laced with steel. "Just sign away my life? Just hand you the empire you didn't lift a finger to build? No, Vanessa. Tonight, if there is to be a scene, it won't be mine. It will be yours." Gasps broke the silence. Across the table, forks clattered against plates. Mark leaned forward, his eyes narrow slits. "Sylvia," he said smoothly, his voice dipped in poison, "we're only thinking of you. This empire is too much for one person. Too much for an old woman. You'll ruin it if you try to hold on. There it was, the crack in his mask. The caring son-in-law gone, the predator revealed. I sat back in my chair, lifting my glass, letting the stem rest between my fingers. Too much for me? Funny, Mark, because I seem to recall it was my name, my work, and my sweat that built every brick of it. And where were you, standing on the sidelines, waiting for the curtain to fall so you could step into my place? The air in the room thickened. My words cut sharper than the knives beside the plates. Vanessa's face flushed red, and she hissed, "Mom, stop embarrassing yourself." Embarrassing myself. The phrase echoed, bitter and cold. I had spent 80 years guarding my dignity, clawing my way from flour-dusted aprons in a bakery to the highest floors of skyscrapers I owned. And here was my own daughter calling me an embarrassment for refusing to be robbed. I placed my glass down deliberately, the sound sharp against the wood. Embarrassing? No, Vanessa. Tonight you'll learn what embarrassment truly looks like. Whitaker stepped forward then, adjusting his glasses. He pressed a button on the projector remote, and the screen flickered to life. A grainy audio recording filled the room, Mark's voice dripping with arrogance. "She's old. She'll sign anything if we push hard enough. Once the ink is dry, she's powerless. The empire is ours." The effect was instantaneous. The guests, my family, my friends, people who had known me for decades, shifted uncomfortably, their heads snapping toward Vanessa and Mark. Whispers broke out, a tide of disapproval swelling. Emma's eyes widened. She looked at me, her face a mix of horror and relief. She had heard her parents whisper before, but never like this. Never with proof that echoed against the walls for all to hear. Vanessa leapt to her feet. "That's doctored. You can't seriously believe this nonsense." "Sit down," I said, sharper this time. The room obeyed my command even if she didn't. My voice, though cracked with age, carried the authority of decades, authority they had forgotten I still held. Whitaker clicked again. This time, an email appeared on the screen. Large, bold subject line. The birthday plan. The body was worse. Mark's words in black and white, laying out their scheme. The champagne, the folder, the moment after the candles. Every step orchestrated like a play. Vanessa's knees buckled, and she sank back into her chair. Mark's smirk collapsed into a scowl. Around us, the murmurs rose into judgment. Unbelievable. Her own daughter? Disgusting. The tide of the room was no longer theirs to control. I leaned forward, my eyes fixed on the two of them. "You thought tonight would be my surrender. You dressed it in cake and champagne, cloaked it in laughter and toasts. But you forgot something. Age doesn't weaken the mind. It sharpens it. And betrayal doesn't hide in darkness forever. It always comes to light." I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting my words sink like stones into their hearts. Then I added softly, almost like a whisper, "And tonight, it is blinding." The projector hummed again. More documents, more evidence. Bank transfers, emails, signatures forged with shaky imitations of my hand. Each slide was another nail in their coffin. Mark slammed his palm against the table. "This is outrageous. You think you can humiliate us like this in front of everyone?" I didn't flinch. "No, Mark. You humiliated yourselves the moment you decided greed mattered more than family." The room was no longer a birthday celebration. It had become a courtroom, and I was not the frail defendant they imagined. I was the judge, and they stood accused. I rose slowly from my chair, 80 years heavy in my bones, but fire burning in my chest. My shadow stretched long against the wall, taller than I'd felt in years, and in that silence, in that charged stillness, I knew the night was far from over. The candles had been blown, but the real flames, the truth, had only just begun to burn. The screen glowed white as the next slide flickered into place, illuminating Whitaker's stern face. He stepped forward with the calm authority of a man who had spent decades in courtrooms, dissecting lies for a living. His silver hair caught the faint light, giving him an almost spectral presence as the entire room fell under his control. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice low but commanding. My apologies for interrupting what was supposed to be a joyous occasion. But tonight, it seems, Mrs. Whitmore's birthday was chosen as the stage for something far more sinister. And since transparency has been forced into the room, transparency we shall have. Gasps and murmurs rippled around the table. Emma sat straighter, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes darting between me and Whitaker with the kind of relief that only comes when truth begins to surface. Vanessa's hand shot out, clutching at Mark's sleeve. "This is absurd," she hissed. "Mom, stop this before it goes too far." "You'll regret it, regret?" I repeated, my voice steady. "Vanessa, the only regret I carry is that I allowed you to grow into a woman who thinks her mother is nothing more than a signature away from extinction." Whitaker raised a hand, silencing the whispers. With a click, another document appeared on the screen, a scanned page with my name scrawled across the bottom. Only it wasn't mine. The signature was sloppy, uneven, an amateur's attempt at forgery. "This," Whitaker said, tapping the screen with his pointer, "was submitted last month to a private bank in an attempt to access one of Mrs. Whitmore's trust accounts. The handwriting analysis confirms it is not hers. The request was rejected and reported." Fortunately, the guests shifted uncomfortably, their murmurs sharpening into outrage. A cousin muttered, "Unbelievable." A nephew shook his head, whispering to his wife, "Her own daughter?" Vanessa's face burned crimson. "That doesn't prove anything. Anyone could have—" "Ah, but it does," Whitaker interrupted crisply, "because the submission was traced back to a laptop registered under Mr. Mark Hastings's name. The IP address leads directly to your home." Mark's mask shattered. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The sweat beading on his forehead told the story for him. Whitaker continued with ruthless precision. Slide after slide revealed their schemes, unauthorized attempts to access my property deeds, drafted documents transferring controlling shares of businesses into their names, email chains where they discussed the best way to keep Emma quiet. At that, Emma gasped aloud, her eyes flying wide. She turned toward her parents, horror breaking across her face. You talked about silencing me?" "Emma," Vanessa snapped, her voice desperate now, "that's not what it means." "Oh, it means exactly what it sounds like," I cut in, my voice sharp. "It means that not only did you plan to rob me, you saw my granddaughter, your daughter, as a threat, a child more loyal than her own mother." The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Then Whitaker delivered the final blow. He clicked once more, and a video began to play. The timestamp was just 2 weeks earlier. Mark's voice filled the speakers, captured by a recorder Whitaker had planted after my suspicions grew. "She's 80. She won't put up a fight. Once she signs, it's all ours. We can sell off the deadweight properties and finally live the way we deserve. Emma won't say anything. She's too young to matter." The audio echoed in the hushed dining room, every syllable like a hammer striking a coffin nail. I rose slowly, my hands braced against the table. My knees protested, but my back was straight, my voice unwavering. Do you hear yourselves now? Do you see the monsters you've become? You called me old, weak, useless. But tonight, everyone here sees the truth. It is not age that rots a person. It is greed. The family stirred, murmuring in agreement. Some looked at me with pity, others with admiration. But all eyes turned on Vanessa and Mark with disgust. Mark slammed his fist on the table. "This is nothing but slander," he barked, his voice cracking. "We'll sue you, Sylvia. We'll drag you through court until—" "Until what?" I cut him off. "Until I'm dead? Until you finally steal what you think you're owed? Go ahead, Mark, try. But I've already taken steps you don't even know about." Whitaker smiled faintly, stepping aside as if to punctuate my words. "Indeed. Legal action has already begun. Fraudulent transfers have been reported. The forged signature has been filed with authorities. It's not a question of if there will be consequences. It's a matter of when." The color drained from Mark's face. Vanessa buried hers in her hands, sobbing now, though whether from shame or fear I couldn't tell. Emma rose quietly from her seat, her hand reaching for mine. She squeezed it tightly, whispering just loud enough for me to hear, "I told you they wouldn't win, Grandma." Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back. This was not a night for tears. This was a night for fire. I raised my chin and addressed the room. I may be 80, but I am not blind, I am not weak, and I am not alone. They tried to take everything from me, but tonight they lost far more than money. They lost their dignity, their family, their masks. The projector clicked off, leaving the room in near darkness. The silence was deafening. Then I spoke, my voice calm, cutting through the heavy air. "Happy birthday to me." The guests erupted, not with cheers, but with gasps and whispers, judgment and disbelief. Vanessa and Mark sat frozen, cornered, their empire of lies crumbling around them. And I sat tall, my shadow cast long across the wall, the matriarch who had refused to be erased. The room was suffocatingly still, the silence broken only by the faint whir of the projector cooling down. I could feel the weight of decades pressing into my bones, but I would not bend, not tonight. Vanessa sat slumped in her chair, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her sobs shallow and uneven. Mark's face, once so smug, was now carved with rage, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting across the table, searching for someone, anyone, to take his side. But no one moved. My family sat in stunned disbelief, a wall of judgment he couldn't charm or bully his way through. I rose from my seat, steadying myself on the edge of the table. The air felt heavier as I stood, but my voice carried with the clarity of truth. "You all saw it," I began, sweeping my gaze across the room. "You all heard it, the daughter I carried, the son-in-law I welcomed, planning, plotting, scheming to strip me of everything. To erase me before I was even gone," a cousin whispered. "Shameful." Another relative muttered, "How could she?" Their voices rolled like distant thunder, growing louder with every passing second. I fixed my eyes on Vanessa. "Tell me, child, when did I stop being your mother and become a bank account to you? Was it after the bakery grew into something bigger? Was it when you married Mark and thought his slick tongue made him king of the world? Or was it tonight, when you paraded me to this table and tried to bury me under my own birthday cake?" Vanessa's lips trembled. "Mom, I just wanted security. Security." My laugh was bitter, sharp. "I gave you security. I gave you more than I ever had. The schools, the house, the life you live, those were my gifts. And you would repay me by stabbing me in the back here, in front of the very people who once celebrated our family." Mark pushed himself up from his chair, slamming his palm against the table. Enough of this performance, Sylvia. You think you're untouchable, but you're not. You're old, and the world doesn't wait for old women. That empire will crumble with or without us. I didn't flinch. I stepped closer, my eyes boring into his. You call me old, as if it is an insult. But let me tell you something, Mark. Age is not weakness. Age is experience. Age is knowing how to survive storms men like you would drown in. You mistake my years for fragility, when in truth they are the very reason you will never defeat me. The room hummed with tension. The guests, family, distant friends, neighbors, watched with wide eyes, as though they had stumbled into a courtroom drama rather than a birthday dinner. Emma rose from her seat, her hand trembling as she reached for mine. Her young voice rang out steady despite the quiver in it. Grandma isn't alone. She never was. I warned her. I heard everything. And you both laughed about it, about her, about me. But I won't be quiet anymore. Her words cut deeper than mine ever could. Vanessa gasped as though struck, but Emma didn't falter. She turned to her parents, her eyes blazing with betrayal and defiance. I'm ashamed of you. Both of you. A hush swept the room. The tables had turned so far there was no recovering for them now. I squeezed Emma's hand, my voice calm but resolute. You see, Vanessa, you tried to teach your daughter greed, but she inherited loyalty instead. You tried to bury me, but she became my light. Vanessa collapsed further into her chair, sobs shaking her shoulders. Mark muttered curses under his breath, but his voice had lost its venom. He sounded like a man cornered. I addressed the room once more, my voice rising with a strength I didn't know I still possessed. Tonight, you have witnessed the truth. You've seen what betrayal looks like. But more importantly, you've seen what justice looks like. Because I will not be erased, I will not be silenced, and I will not be robbed, not by strangers and certainly not by my own blood. The relatives shifted, some nodding in solemn agreement. A few even clapped softly, hesitant, but sincere. The tide had fully turned. The shame was no longer mine to carry. It was theirs. Whitaker stepped forward then, his presence like a gavel striking wood. For the record, he announced, his voice echoing across the stunned room. Legal proceedings have already been initiated. Fraudulent attempts at asset seizure, forgery, and coercion are all actionable offenses. I expect law enforcement will be in touch with Mr. and Mrs. Hastings very soon. Vanessa let out a strangled sob. Mark's fist clenched, but his shoulders sagged in defeat. I turned back to them one final time. You wanted my empire, but all you've won tonight is the truth laid bare for everyone to see. And that truth will follow you longer than any dollar ever could. I sat back down, my chest heaving, my heart pounding. Emma slid into the chair beside me, her small hand gripping mine tightly. Around us, the guests remained silent, but the silence was no longer suffocating. It was condemning. I had not just survived their betrayal, I had exposed it, and in doing so, I reclaimed not just my empire, but my dignity. The night was far from over, but the battle was already won. The silence after Whitaker's declaration was unbearable, heavy, suffocating. Every breath in that room seemed to echo like thunder. My hands rested on the table, steady as stone, but inside my chest my heart pounded like a war drum. Mark was the first to move. His chair screeched against the floor as he shoved it back, the sound shrill and angry. He stood, his fists clenched, his face twisted into a mask of rage. "This is a circus," he spat. "You think you've humiliated us, Sylvia?" "Number, you've humiliated yourself." I tilted my head, studying him like one might study a dangerous but pitiful animal. Humiliated myself. No, Mark, you did that all on your own, he sneered, his voice trembling now with desperation. You won't get away with this. You've poisoned everyone here against us, but when the dust settles, you'll still be nothing but a frail old woman clinging to her fortune. Before I could answer, Emma stood. Her voice, though soft, rang clear. She's not frail. She's stronger than both of you combined, and she doesn't need to prove it to anyone anymore. You've done that for her tonight. The crowd murmured again, approval rippling like a current. Mark's glare snapped to his daughter, but Emma didn't flinch. For the first time in her young life, she stood between me and her parents, not out of fear but out of defiance. Vanessa, on the other hand, collapsed inward. Her sobs filled the room now, not delicate weeps but ugly, broken sounds. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders trembling. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes were red, her cheeks streaked with black mascara. She looked at me, not as a mother, not as an adversary, but as a child. "Mom," she whispered, her voice raw. "Please, please don't let this happen." I didn't mean for it to go this far." My throat tightened. For a fleeting second, I saw her as the little girl she once was, the one who used to curl into my lap when nightmares chased her from sleep. My heart ached, torn between the woman she had become and the daughter I once knew. But I steeled myself. "Vanessa," I said quietly but firmly, "you made choices. You let greed guide your hand. You let Mark twist you into someone I barely recognize. And now you must live with those choices." She shook her head violently. No, please. Mom, I was just scared. Scared you'd leave everything to Emma. Scared I'd be forgotten. I only wanted," her voice cracked, "only wanted to matter." The word stabbed deeper than any scheme. To matter. Had I failed her? Had my love somehow never reached her in a way she believed? Or had she simply mistaken wealth for love, thinking only fortune could define her worth? The room shifted uncomfortably. Some guests lowered their eyes, others stared at Vanessa with pity, but none came to her defense. Not one. Mark, seeing her unravel, slammed, his hand down again. "Enough begging, Vanessa. She's playing you. Can't you see? This is all her manipulation. She's turning everyone against us." Whitaker stepped forward, his voice cold. "The only manipulation here is yours, Mr. Mummerdings. And let me remind you, fraud and forgery carry prison terms. You'd do well to remember that before raising your voice again." Mark's face twisted, and for the first time fear cracked through his bravado. He sank slowly back into his chair, his fists still trembling, his eyes darting anywhere but mine. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself. "You both thought tonight would be the end of me. You thought you could paint me into a corner, make me sign away my life with candles still smoking on the cake. But what you failed to understand is this. My empire isn't just money. It's my name, my story, my dignity. And those things cannot be stolen with ink." Emma's hand slipped into mine again, warm and grounding. She whispered, "You don't have to explain to them, Grandma. They don't deserve it. But I wasn't speaking for them anymore. I was speaking for myself. For every year of sacrifice, for every night of labor, for every brick I had laid with Robert's memory still beside me." The guests began to shift. Chairs scraped as cousins and distant relatives quietly excused themselves from the table, their shame for Vanessa and Mark too heavy to bear. A nephew muttered as he left, "I won't stand for thieves in the family." One by one they slipped out, until only a handful remained. Vanessa sobbed into her napkin. Mark sat rigid, his face pale and hollow. The empire they thought they'd seize had turned into a prison closing around them. And me? I sat taller than I had in years, my back straight, my voice strong, my dignity intact. For all their scheming, for all their plotting, Vanessa and Mark had given me something I hadn't felt in a long time. Vindication. Proof that I was still the woman who built an empire, still the matriarch who would not bend. But beneath the triumph, the ache remained. Betrayal from a stranger is a wound. Betrayal from your own child is a scar carved into the soul. I turned my eyes toward Vanessa one last time that night. You wanted to matter. And you do. But not for the reasons you dreamed of. You will matter as a lesson, that greed devours everything it touches. Even family, her sobs deepened. Mark sat silent, his eyes burning but defeated. And as I looked at Emma, her young face lit with determination, I realized the torch had already passed, not in paper or signatures, but in spirit. She was my true legacy. The dining room felt smaller now, as though the walls had shifted inward, trapping Vanessa and Mark in a cage of their own making. The projector still sat silent, its glow fading, but the damage had been done. Their lies hung in the air like smoke that could never be cleared. Whitaker adjusted his glasses, his voice calm, clipped, and merciless. For the record, he said, looking directly at Mark, all fraudulent transfers and forged signatures have already been submitted to the district attorney's office. I spoke with them earlier this week. Charges are pending. You should expect a summons. The words fell like a hammer. Mark's face drained of color, his fists tightening until his knuckles shone white. He tried to speak, but his throat only made a strangled sound. Vanessa's sobs grew louder, her face buried in her hands. Gasps rippled across the few guests who remained. A cousin whispered, "The DA? Oh, Lord." Another shook his head, muttering, "How could they be so brazen?" Whitaker didn't stop. He clicked his briefcase open and withdrew another folder. "Additionally," he continued, "all of Mrs. Whitmore's holdings have already been secured under a trust, one which names neither of you as beneficiaries. Your access is gone. Permanently." The silence was thunderous. Vanessa looked up, her face blotched red, her voice trembling. "Mom, no, you can't do this to us." "We're family. Everything you built, it should stay in the family." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers. "Family?" My voice was soft, but every word carried weight. Family does not drug their mother with champagne. Family does not whisper about her as if she were already dead. Family does not treat her life's work as loot to be stolen. Blood may bind us, Vanessa, but loyalty is what makes a family, and you lost that long ago. Her lips quivered, her eyes desperate. "Then who, Mom? Who gets it all? If not us, then who?" I let the silence stretch, let the weight of her question settle. And then I smiled, not smug, but resolute. "Not who. What? My empire will go where it always should have, to the people who need it, to the charities Robert and I dreamed of building when we were young and broke, to scholarships for children who were born with as little as I had, to foundations that will carry our name with pride, not shame." Vanessa shook her head in disbelief, her sobs breaking into gasps. "No, you can't. That's ours. It was never yours," I cut in sharply. "It was mine. Mine to build, mine to protect, and now mine to give away." Mark finally found his voice, low and venomous. "So you'd rather strangers enjoy your fortune than your own daughter?" I turned my gaze on him, my words steady as steel. "I would rather see strangers rise with integrity than my own blood rot in greed." The room erupted with murmurs, some nodding, some whispering in shock, but all eyes remained fixed on us. Emma's hand tightened around mine. She spoke, her young voice trembling but resolute. "Grandma's right. It's not about money. It's about what you do with it. You both forgot that." But she didn't. I looked at her then, my granddaughter, the only one who had stood beside me when the wolves circled. My throat tightened, but I managed to smile. Emma will not inherit the empire in her name. She will inherit something far greater, its spirit. She has already proven she's the one who deserves to carry it forward. Tears welled in Emma's eyes, but she held them back, her chin lifting proudly. Whitaker closed his folder with a crisp snap. For clarity's sake, every legal safeguard has already been executed. Vanessa, Mark, you no longer have any pathway to Mrs. Whitmore's estate, and the fraudulent attempts you've made will carry their own consequences in due time. The finality in his voice was like a door slamming shut. Vanessa wailed into her napkin. Mark's face twisted with silent fury, but he said nothing. His power had evaporated, his schemes laid bare, his empire of lies reduced to ash. I stood then, though my knees trembled under the weight of 80 years. The room quieted instantly. I raised my glass one final time. I may be old, but tonight I've proven something. Betrayal does not end a life. It reveals its strength, and greed does not conquer integrity. It destroys itself. Tonight, justice is mine. I sipped the wine slowly, savoring the bitter sweetness of both drink and victory. Then I looked at Emma, her young face radiant with courage, and whispered just for her, "And tomorrow, justice will be yours." When the last guest finally left, the house fell into silence, not the silence of shame or secrecy, but the kind that comes after a storm, the air heavy, the ground soaked, but the sky clearing at last. I sat at the head of the long dining table, crumbs of cake still scattered across the white linen, the scent of extinguished candles lingering faintly. The projector had been packed away. Whitaker had taken his leave with a reassuring nod, and Vanessa and Mark had slunk off into the night like thieves, caught in their own trap. Emma stayed behind. She moved quietly around the table, gathering plates, her hands steady despite all she had seen. She paused, looking at me with those earnest eyes that had never once betrayed me. "Are you all right, Grandma?" she asked softly. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I am," I whispered, though my voice carried the ache of something deeper. "But I will never be the same. Betrayal leaves scars, even when justice is served. Tonight I had stood taller than I had in years, but my heart still bore the wound of realizing my own daughter had plotted against me. That kind of pain does not disappear. It lingers, reshaping the way you see the world." I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a moment. My mind drifted through the decades, Robert's laugh echoing in the bakery, the smell of fresh bread at dawn, the keys heavy in my hand as we bought our first property, the long nights spent at the kitchen table balancing ledgers. I saw Vanessa as a child, her arms wrapped around my neck, whispering, "I love you, Mommy." I saw Emma as a girl, her little hand clutching mine at Robert's funeral. I saw every sacrifice, every triumph, every brick laid in the foundation of a life built with blood and sweat. And then I saw tonight Vanessa's smirk as she carried in the cake, Mark's whisper dripping with arrogance, the folder sitting like a loaded gun on the table, the laughter of relatives who had no idea of the storm about to break, and finally, the gasps, the silence, the truth. I opened my eyes and looked at Emma. "Do you know what hurts the most?" And I asked her. She shook her head. "It's not the money. It's not even the lies. It's that for a moment, just a moment, I believed they still saw me as their mother. And then I realized they didn't. They saw me as an obstacle, as a signature to be stolen. That is what cut the deepest. Emma squeezed my hand tighter, her eyes glistening. "You still have me," she whispered. And she was right. For all I had lost tonight, I had gained something priceless: clarity. I turned to the darkened window, my reflection staring back at me, older but unbroken. 80 years, I murmured. 80 years, and I'm still learning that family is not always defined by blood. Family is defined by loyalty, by love, by the people who stand beside you when the wolves circle. I looked back at Emma, her young face fierce with loyalty. "You are my family, Emma. You always will be." She smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. "And you're mine, Grandma." The ache in my chest softened. For the first time that night, I allowed myself to feel peace. Later, when Emma had gone to bed and the house was finally still, I poured myself one last glass of wine. I walked through the halls of my home, pausing to touch the pictures that lined the walls. Robert's smile frozen in time, Vanessa as a baby in my arms, Emma in her graduation gown. Each frame told a story, each one a reminder of all I had fought for. I stopped at the front door, looking out into the quiet night. I thought about Vanessa and Mark, about what would become of them. Perhaps prison, perhaps disgrace, perhaps years later, regret. But their path was no longer mine to guide. I whispered into the darkness, "You tried to take everything from me, but in the end you gave me back something more precious than gold. You reminded me who I am, and who I will always be." I lifted my glass, raising it not to the empty air, but to myself. "Happy birthday, Sylvia," I said softly. 80 years of fire and still burning. And as I took a slow sip, I thought of you. Yes, you, listening to my story now. If you've stayed with me this long, you know that betrayal is not reserved for the young. It does not vanish with age. It only grows sharper, more painful, because it comes from those we least expect. But remember this: you are never too old to stand. You are never too old to fight, and you are never too old to win. So before I end, I'll ask you again, where are you watching from? Tonight? From a quiet kitchen table like mine? From a porch under the stars? From a small room where you feel forgotten? Wherever you are, know this: you are not powerless. Not now, not ever. 80 candles were nothing to blow out. But extinguishing their schemes, that was my true gift, and I will carry it proudly for whatever years remain.